All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do lesson 9.1 part 1 today. That's going to be solving quadratic equation by finding square roots. All right, so what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about square roots, okay? And every time you find a square root of a number, there are always two answers. You will have a positive square root and you'll have a negative square root, okay? So most everybody knows something about square roots. You've done something with them before. Now, there are a few square roots that you will probably have memorized, like this one right here, the square root of 9. Everyone, well, not everyone, I guess. Most everyone knows that the square root of 9 is 3. Okay? Now, also, what you may not realize is the square root of 9 is also negative 3. And the reason why I know that is because a square root means I'm going to multiply this number right here, the square root times itself, and I will get the number that is here under the radical sign. And we'll go over the signs in just a second. So, think about it. 3 times 3 is 9, but also negative 3 times negative 3 is also positive 9. So your square root, okay, will always have two answers, a positive and a negative of the exact same number, okay? Now let's go over the different symbols for a square root. This symbol right here, we call it the square root symbol, or the proper name for it is called the radical sign. Okay, square root symbol or the radical sign. So when you see in your book or you're told, write this number under a radical, you know it's the square root symbol. The number underneath the radical sign is called your radicand. All right? So let's go through and let's start answering some of these questions. The square root of 9, we just went over that. What is the square root of 9? 3. Very good. Okay? Now, we're just going to say 3. Now, let's look here. This negative sign on the outside of square root, the square root symbol, anytime you have a sign on the outside of your square root symbol, like we do here in this second one and this third one, that sign will always be carried into your answer. There's never an instance where it won't be. Okay, so now I'm looking for the negative square root of 9. So the negative square root of 9 is, again, 3. Okay, now this symbol right here, this one that looks like a plus and a minus sign, is called the positive negative or the plus minus. That's all that means. So I'm looking for the positive and the negative square root of 9. So again, like I said, anytime you have a symbol on the outside of your radical, all right, it always is transferred into your answer. So again, it will also be 3. Now, one other thing that I want to tell you that I did not write on here is if you ever see something like this, where you actually have a negative sign underneath the radical, there is no such thing as the square root of negative 9, okay? That's what we call an imaginary number, which we're not even going to deal with until you get to Algebra 2 or Trig, okay? So, anytime you see a negative sign underneath the radical, you know that your answer is undefined, okay? It will never be anything else. Undefined anytime you have a negative sign underneath a radical. All right, so let's go through and let's solve these. The square root of 81 is what, Jake? 9. Very good. The negative square root of 81 is what, Sam? Negative 9. Very good. Don't forget to transfer that negative sign. The positive negative square root of 81 is what, Caroline? Positive negative 9. Very good. And lastly, the square root of negative 81 is what, Stefan? Undefined. Very good. And if you just want to write undefined, that's fine, okay? Okay, now let's do the next example. Give the exact value of the square root. Now, there's going to be times where you have a square root symbol with no exact square root, okay? In this first one, we actually do have an exact square root. So what is the negative square root of 36?
Negative 6.
Very good, negative 6. Okay, now, let's look at this next one. The square root of 8. Think to yourself, if I know the square root is two numbers, the exact same number being multiplied to find that number underneath the radical. So I'm going to go, okay, 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, I'm realizing there are no two numbers that multiply together to get 8. Don't make the mistake of going, oh, the square root of 8 is 4, because 4 times 2 is 8. It has to be 4 times 4, which 4 times 4 is 16. So there is no exact square root of 8. So what you want to do is you want to plug this into your calculator, and your calculator is probably going to give you, if you have the calculator that I suggested, the answer 2 times the square root of 2. All you need to do is push the little white button that has an arrow going to the left and to the right, and it will change that answer into a decimal. Because in these instructions, I want you to round to the nearest hundredth. So what you're going to see on your calculator is 2.828, and it keeps going, okay? But since I want to round to the nearest hundredth, I'm going to look what's in my hundredth spot. 2, I look behind it to the 8, and I realize that I need to round up. So my answer is going to be 2.83. All right? And lastly, last example, okay? We want to evaluate this radical expression. So I've got the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. And what they've given me is they've given me all the values that I want to plug in. A equals 1, b equals negative 2, and c equals negative 3. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in all of my values. I'm going to write the square root sign. I know that b squared is negative 2 squared minus 4 times a is 1 and c is negative 3. Now, if you noticed, with b, I went ahead, since it was a negative number, and put it in parentheses. Because if you plug in negative 2 squared into your calculator, it's going to tell you the answer is negative 4, which is incorrect. If you plug this into your calculator, you have to use parentheses around the negative 2, because it's actually negative 2 times negative 2, which is positive 4. Very good. Okay, now, I'm going to leave this radical symbol here the entire time. I'm not going to do anything with it until the very last step. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it, and I'm going to work what's underneath it. So we already said negative 2 squared was 4. Then I'm going to multiply the numbers that we have behind it. So negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Then negative 4 times negative 3 is what? Positive 12. So that's going to change this symbol right here to 4 plus 12. All right, I'm going to still finish what's underneath the radical. 4 plus 12 is 16. So now the square root of 16 is what? 4. All right, that would be my final answer.